I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
Hey folks, you're listening to the best of Conduit News Radio with me, Paul Harrell.
On the line, welcome back to the show. Senator Tom Cotton is with us. Senator Cotton, thanks so much for spending time with us this morning.
Good morning, Paul. It's good to be on with you.
Yes, sir. I just want to say, thanks for being on the forefront. I know you're definitely supporting. You've had some great ideas about reforming our immigration system. And I understand that there is now talk about needing to get something done when it comes to EVerify. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Paul, I am going to be introducing legislation that would expand to all employers and make permanent our electronic employment verification system. So this was a system that was created as a pilot program in 1996, but it's been successful. It's gotten better over the last 23 years. Rather than going into work and submitting the paper documents that so many people are familiar with on the first day of the job, say a driver's license or a concealed carry permit or a passport, there'd be a very quick online system. That system works. Its error rate is infinitesimally small, and it's been proven time and again to be the single best deterrent from employing illegal immigrants. So it helps turn off the jobs magnet in our country. There's a lot of debate in the news, obviously, about border barriers and more Border Patrol agents and more border detention facilities, all of which are very important. But one of the main reasons that people immigrate illegally to this country is to take jobs from Americans. If they know that they're going to have to clear an effective electronic verification system, they're much less likely to make that journey in the first place. Moreover, it helps hold employers accountable. When employers are saying, we don't want to use EVerify because it doesn't work, what they really mean is it does work. They want to get cheap, unskilled, and low-skilled labor into the country so they're not having to pay higher wages to American citizens. That's not what I want to see. I want to see all Americans taking part in the prosperity that America is creating.
Absolutely. And I think, certainly that reflects, I think, the sentiment of a vast majority of Arkansans. It's the common sense thing to do. It is about economic security as well as national security. Again, folks, we're talking with Senator Tom Cotton. We're talking about EVerify. You mentioned the low wages that employers tend to want. So they tend to want illegal immigration. And then you have maybe the other side that sees illegal immigrants as maybe a future dependent class, also future votes for liberal progressive policies. And I kind of feel like that's why this crisis at the border, it's not something, it's gotten worse, but it's not something that just happened overnight. This has been going on for years, if not, a decade or more. And now we finally have, President Trump bringing this to the forefront of the nation's attention. And I think that's a positive thing to try to fix this problem.
Paul, it really goes back in some ways to the 1986 immigration law, which Ronald Reagan said was one of his worst mistakes in office. That bill gave an amnesty up front in return for enforcement later. Unfortunately, we didn't get the enforcement. We didn't get border barriers. We didn't get more interior enforcement at the workplace. We didn't get reform laws to allow the deportation of violent and felonious illegal aliens that we were all promised, because so many people in Washington joined forces to stop all that. They all wanted the amnesty, big business, pardon me, and a lot of politicians and their backers across the country, they wanted more cheap, unskilled, and low-skilled labor. understandable. I get the economic point of it, but we owe it to our own citizens to protect American jobs for American citizens. Moreover, we want to welcome the kind of immigrants who can succeed in our country, who are going to contribute to the economy, who are going to help grow the economy, and ultimately become citizens, not just temporary guest workers that come in and take work and then go back home. I'd much rather see immigrants who want to become American citizens rather than folks who are coming in here to work for a few months to take jobs that Americans could be doing.
Why do you think the left is so offended when, your ideas on more of a merit-based immigration system where, we want people who come into this country that already have skills, that they can participate in the economy, they can pay taxes, do things like that. Why do you think today that is so offensive to those? They even say maybe it's even racist sometimes.
Well, that's a very good question, Paul. I mean, sometimes I think it reflects the left's reflective desire for ever more immigration. And it's not just here in America. You see it in Europe as well. Look what Angela Merkel did in Germany a few years back, just throwing open the doors to anyone who could come. I think it's also a bit of a left-wing challenge to the very idea of the nation state, that, a nation state with borders and a people is something that is a good thing. I think it's one of the great developments in modern human history. I mean, one reason why we have freedom, why we have security, why we have prosperity is that we have a nation with borders, with a government that can provide police services and the rule of law and protection for our property and protection from threats from abroad. 500, 1,000 years ago, you didn't have those things. Look at what happens in movies and TV shows like Game of Thrones. The nation state is the way that we protect ourselves, that we grow our own wealth, that we have a community. A lot of folks on the left are very cosmopolitan in their view of the world. They think the nation state is somehow inherently suspect, and that anybody who wants to be an American should be considered American. That's not the way I view things. I was elected by 3 million Arkansans to represent the interest of Arkansans, not the interest of foreigners. I may wish them well, but it is not my duty to make sure that they are prospering and they are safe. It's my duty to do that for Arkansans and for all Americans.
We're talking with Senator Tom Cotton. Senator Cotton, the president declares this national emergency. A lot of people saw this coming. Do you think it's an emergency down there? Do you think it is a crisis on our southern border?
We do have a genuine crisis on our southern border, Paul. And I'll tell you one reason why is that our immigration system, both our physical infrastructure and our legal system, is not equipped for the kind of migration patterns we're seeing now. In part because of well-intentioned law passed by both parties, we are essentially having to let anyone who shows up in our border with a child that they claim is their child in, who rarely then ever shows up again. Immigration has changed in recent years. So we still have a lot of young men coming in to work in jobs, but increasingly we have family units, people with children who are coming in saying they want to claim asylum. They want to be a refugee. Now, I would say that a lot of those claims are not well-grounded because they're not claiming they're facing persecution because of their religion or political views or sex. They're just claiming that conditions in Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador are dangerous and poor. That's true, but that's what most of the world calls life. That doesn't make us responsible for them. But our immigration system is not well equipped to either detain families together or to track families once we release them into the United States. That's one reason why it's so urgent. Not just that we build the border barriers that get so much attention, but that we change those asylum laws, that we provide more family detention centers and give more flexibility to our border professionals. So we make sure that we don't have a functional open border. So if anybody shows up with a child that they claim asylum, they just get released in the country and never come back.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. During the State of the Union address, the president talked about putting the cartels, the drug dealers, and the human traffickers out of business. That scenario that you just raised, somebody comes to, with a child they claim is their own, and then you never see him again. Sex trafficking is a real problem down there, and that gets so little media attention.
Yeah, so these networks of traffickers will move anything that they can make a dime off. They'll move illicit drugs like marijuana and heroin and fentanyl. They will move stolen goods, and they'll move art and other artifacts. But in this case, they will also move people, to include little children and little girls. They're not just viewed as a get into the country free ticket, but are viewed as sexual objects that they can make money off of repeatedly. It's grotesque. It's sickening, but it unfortunately happens a lot. And anything we do to encourage the view in Central America that you can pay a few $1,000s to one of these traffickers, have your child come to the United States and get released here, is only going to create more incentives for these human traffickers.
Yeah. And, and that brings us back to the EVerify, the legislation that, like you said, you're working on right now. It really is about, we have to disincentivize. We do need the border security. We do need the wall. But if they come here and they can't find employment, then there's no reason to come here.
That is one reason why an EVerify system at the workplace is a supplement to a border barrier. It's a supplement to Border Patrol agents. There's no single solution to our illegal immigration problem. It's kind of like, if you look at a band can't just have one instrument in it. It's got to have multiple instruments if it wants to make great music. Same thing goes with illegal immigration. You need border barriers. You need Border Patrol agents. You need more detention centers and judges, but you have to cut off the jobs magnet, and the simplest way to do that and to protect American jobs is EVerify at the workplace. Wow.
Senator Tom Cotton, really appreciate you coming on the program, spending some time with us this morning.
Thank you, Paul. Good
All right. Yeah, have a great day. Senator Tom Cotton, everybody. It's always great to have him on, and I'm telling you, the stuff with this stuff that he's promoting with this EVerify is obviously, like he said, supplemental to border security. And of course, I love the idea of some of these bigger reforms that maybe can't get traction yet, but the idea, other countries do this, where if you want to come to, this country, I think Australia does it, and others, you're going to have to provide that you prove that you have, some sort of skill set. It's about the type of immigrants we want. Because the bottom line is, if we had unlimited resources, then it would be one thing, but we don't have unlimited resources. And, so this immigration thing is about national security. Okay, so we need a secure border, right? Yeah, you do have terrorists that try to come in and do American harm. You do have the MS-13. You do have the angel moms who have lost their children because of illegal immigration. You have all that. But then there's also something, and nobody wants to talk about this, but there's also something called economic security. You heard Senator Cotton talk about it there. This is the idea that we need to, for the benefit of the Americans living here, we don't need to promote policies that are going to make them poorer. And even if you're a progressive and you agree with a social safety net, right? These progressives drive me nuts. Like, so they want these welfare programs. Okay, and I can get behind social safety net for those who truly need it. You have these welfare programs that are made less solvent. Okay, they're made insolvent by unchecked illegal immigration. But in order to get them to agree, that they have to agree that countries with borders, we want a safety net, but we want the safety net for Americans. Oh, that is somehow so radically offensive these days. But isn't that what we should be doing? Shouldn't our policies help a majority of people that live here? But the left doesn't want these borders anymore. They just don't think, they think it's an antiquated notion. They don't understand that borders represent ideas. Go look at a picture of the Korean Peninsula at night. I've said this a million times. The Korean Peninsula at night.
Hey folks, you're listening to the best of Conduit News Radio with me, Paul Harrell.
This is the House of Representatives chamber in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., where in just a few moments the President will address the Congress on the State of the Union. Here is NBC News correspondent Edwin Newman.
President Nixon is delivering this State of the Union address on the third anniversary of his inauguration as president on January 20th, 1969. He's due in the House chamber in about 10 seconds, and his arrival is to be announced by the House doorkeeper, William Miller, known to everybody as Fishbait Miller.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
There's the President entering, apparently carrying his own copy of his address under his arm. copy to the House Speaker, Carl Albert of Oklahoma, copy to Vice President Agnew, with whom he shakes hands. There's Mrs. Nixon, who was in the chamber was in the gallery about 5 minutes before the President arrived.
Thank you. I don't need it. I never drink water when I'm speaking. I gotta wait till you introduce me, don't I? They have it over here. Thank you.
My colleagues of the Congress, I have the distinct privilege and the high personal honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
They have to do it twice each time. Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, my colleagues in the Congress, our distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. 25 years ago, I sat here as a freshman congressman along with Speaker Albert and listened for the first time to the President address the State of the Union. I shall never forget that moment. The Senate, the diplomatic corps, the Supreme Court, the Cabinet entered the chamber, and then the President of the United States. As all of you are aware, I had some differences with President Truman. He had some with me. But I remember that on that day, the day he addressed that joint session of the newly elected Republican 80th Congress, he spoke not as a partisan, but as President of all the people, calling upon the Congress to put aside partisan considerations in the national interest. The Greek-Turkish aid program, the Marshall Plan, the great foreign policy initiatives which have been responsible for avoiding a world war for over 25 years were approved by the 80th Congress by a bipartisan majority of which I was proud to be a part. 1972 is now before us. It holds precious time in which to accomplish good for the nation. We must not waste it. I know the political pressures in this session of the Congress will be great. There are more candidates for the presidency in this chamber today than there probably have been at any one time in the whole history of the Republic. And there's an honest difference of opinion, not only between the parties, but within each party, on some foreign policy issues and on some domestic policy issues. However, there are great national problems that are so vital that they transcend partisanship. And so let us have our debates, let us have our honest differences, but let us join in keeping the national interest first. Let us join in making sure that legislation the nation needs does not become hostage to the political interests of any party or any person. There is ample precedent in this election year for me to present you with a huge list of new proposals, knowing full well that there wouldn't be any possibility of your passing them if you work night and day. I shall not do that. I have presented to the leaders of the Congress today a message of 15,000 words discussing in some detail where the nation stands and setting forth specific legislative items on which I have asked the Congress to act. Much of this is legislation which I proposed in 1969 and 1970, and also in the first session of this 92nd Congress, and on which I feel it is essential that action be completed this year. I am not presenting proposals which have attractive label but no hope of passage. I am presenting only vital programs which are within the capacity of this Congress to enact, within the capacity of the budget to finance, and which I believe should be above partisanship. Programs which deal with urgent priorities for the nations.
A lot about how we are going to fund our roads. We've been talking about it, but there's probably been people talking even more about it in, down at the Capitol, the 92nd General Assembly. A lot of people have been working hard on this. It's unfortunate that it seems to be that the predominant plan is going to go forward and raise our taxes at the wholesale level with gas and diesel, which would mean more money coming out of our pockets. There is, however, a plan that was filed, and a lot of people are taking a look at it now. It's House Bill 1541. It is by State Representative Julie Mayberry, a Republican from Hensley. She joins us on the line now. State Representative Mayberry, thanks for coming on this morning.
Hey, thank you for having me and helping me get this information out to people, because I think most people think this is the only plan. I think overall we are all in agreement that we have kicked this can down the road so many times, session after session. This is not new conversation that we need highway funding, but now the can is in a pothole and we need to do something, and we have to come out with a plan. I just don't agree with the plan that's being presented. I want to be for something, not against something.
Right.
And so I always believe if you want to complain about something, at least give an alternative, give another idea. And so that's why I filed House Bill 1541. I actually have two other bills that would kind of help as well, but 1541 is probably the more concise, long-term plan. And I wish I could tell you it was my idea. It's not. It's an idea that was presented in 2013. It was a blue ribbon committee that put the main bill together. Former State Representative Jonathan Barnett, who is also the Republican Party committee man, presented the bill and could not get it out of the Transportation Committee back in 2013. And it's a good bill, and it needs to be talked about again. And that's all I'm trying to do is say, hey, this was very well vetted. It had 67 House sponsors. It's a great idea. Let's look at this idea again.
And, I was talking to a legislator yesterday who supports the governor's plan. And he said that he loves the idea of taking everything that's used for driving or road purposes, from the sales and use tax of revenue like your bill does, for new and used vehicles, trailers, semi-trailers. All of this should be directed toward road use. I think most people think that is common sense, but it doesn't appear that that's something that the leadership is ready to do right now. Let me ask you this, State Representative Julie Mayberry. Is the main reason you've put out this plan that doesn't raise taxes, is it because you don't like the fact that the other plan does raise taxes?
Oh, absolutely. If there was another plan that didn't raise taxes, I'd be all over it. We need highway funding, but I think we need to look within. When I need money around my house, I look at where I can save money. What can I do without? Can I get rid of Netflix? Can I get rid of my phone? Can I get rid of, let's see what we can do within. And I think that that's what we need to do with our current government. What money do we currently have, and how should we be directing that money? And that's what this plan does. Over a period of 10 years, we would gradually transfer money from the sale of the new and used vehicles over to the highway fund. So there would not be any major hit in any one year. It would be 10% one year, 20% the next year, 30% all the way up. I do not have a fiscal impact yet. DFNA, I'm sure it's taking a little bit of time to get it to me, but I can go back to the 2013 fiscal impact, and in year one, it's $22 million. By year 10, it was $345 million.
Wow.
And the wonderful thing about that idea is that we need as a
should and must be the subject of bipartisan action by this Congress in the interest of the country in 1972. When I took the oath of office on the steps of this building just 3 years ago today, the nation was ending one of the most tortured decades in its history. The 1960s were a time of great progress in many areas, but as we all know, they were also times of great agony. The agonies of war, of inflation, of rapidly rising crime, of deteriorating cities, of hopes raised and disappointed, and of anger and frustration that led finally to violence and to the worst civil disorder in a century. I recall these troubles, not to point any fingers of blame. The nation was so torn in those final years of the 60s that many in both parties questioned whether America could be governed at all. The nation has made significant progress in these first years of the 70s. Our cities are no longer engulfed by civil disorders. Our colleges and universities have again become places of learning instead of battlegrounds. A beginning has been made in preserving and protecting our environment. The rate of increase in crime has been slowed, and here in the District of Columbia, the one city where the federal government has direct jurisdiction, serious crime in 1971 was actually reduced by 13% from the year before. Most important, because of the beginnings that have been made, we can say today that this year, 1972, can be the year in which America may make the greatest progress in 25 years toward achieving our goal of being at peace with all the nations of the world. As our involvement in the war in Vietnam comes to an end, we must now go on to build a generation of peace. To achieve that goal, we must first face realistically the need to maintain our defense. In the past 3 years, we have reduced the burden of arms. For the first time in 20 years, spending on defense has been brought below spending on human resources. As we look to the future, we find encouraging progress in our negotiations with the Soviet Union on limitation of strategic arms. And looking further into the future, we hope there can eventually be agreement on the mutual reduction of arms. But until there is such a mutual agreement, we must maintain the strength necessary to deter war. And that is why, because of rising research and development costs, because of increases in military and civilian pay, because of the need to proceed with new weapons system, my budget for the coming fiscal year will provide for an increase in defense spending. Strong military defenses are not the enemy of peace, they are the guardians of peace. And there could be no more misguided set of priorities than one which would tempt others by weakening America and thereby endanger the peace of the world. In our foreign policy, we have entered a new era. The world has changed greatly in the 11 years since President John Kennedy said in his inaugural address, "We shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty." Our policy has been carefully and deliberately adjusted to meet the new realities of the new world we live in. We make today only those commitments we are able and prepared to meet. Our commitment to freedom remains strong and unshakable. But others must bear their share of the burden of defending freedom around the world. And so this then is our policy. We will maintain a nuclear deterrent adequate to meet any threat to the security of the United States or of our allies. We will help other nations develop the capability of defending themselves. We will faithfully honor all of our treaty commitments. We will act to defend our interests whenever they are threatened any place in the world. But where our interests or our treaty commitments are not involved, our role will be limited. We will not intervene militarily, but we will use our influence to prevent war. If war comes, we will use our influence to stop it. And once it is over, we will do our share in helping to bind up the wounds of those who have participated in it. As you know, I will soon be visiting the People's Republic of China and the Soviet Union.
Hey, folks, you're listening to the best of Conduit News Radio with me, Paul Harrell.
How should we be directing that money? And that's what this plan does. Over a period of 10 years, we would gradually transfer money from the sale of the new and used vehicles over to the highway fund. So there would not be any major hit in any one year. It would be 10% one year, 20% the next year, 30% all the way up. I do not have a fiscal impact yet. The FNA, I'm sure it's taking a little bit of time to get it to me, but I can go back to the 2013 fiscal impact, and in year one, it's $22 million. By year 10, it was $345 million.
Wow.
And the wonderful thing about that idea is that we meet as a legislature every other year, and if somewhere along the line our economy tanks or we need to make adjustments, we still can. If we pass this half-cent sales tax, it's permanent. It's in our Constitution, and it does not have a sunset clause. And that would be much more difficult to change. This is still fluid, and if we decide that, the economy is not growing at 3%, there are protections in there to make sure that we're not taking away from any our adequacy funding and all the other things that are really important. It only goes into effect if there's 3% growth. And I feel confident in that. We have casino money that's going to be coming in. And if that casino money starts coming in, and we just passed some other tax cuts, if the tax cuts do what you expect them to do, our economy should be growing. And back in 2013, I think that there were other things that might have been of concern at that time. We had Obamacare pushed on us and a lot of other issues that were kind of a priority at that time. We've taken care of those things.
Yeah.
This is the time to bring this plan back up.
You mentioned Obamacare. I mean, when it comes to Arkansas Works, originally at this time, a couple of years ago, I think 4 years ago, that was projected to cost us $50 million. And of course, I think this year it's actually costing us $138 million. And so, that's a lot of money that could go to roads that we have allocated somewhere else. You mentioned Republican National Committeeman Jonathan Barnett. And as a matter of fact, it's interesting because I already had scheduled, after our interviews concluded, I went back and I found the video, State Representative Mayberry, from 2011, where Jonathan Barnett was on the House floor, then State Representative, and he was presenting HJR 1001. And this was the bill that everyone voted on that had a sales tax increase to fund for specific projects with a sunset clause. And he assured, and he can't bind future legislators. No one can. But I just think it's if you go back and listen to it and you get this assurance, this is a temporary tax, it's going to go away. But it's now the plan is to send it back to the voters to make it a permanent tax. And I think that just fuels the skepticism that citizens have when it comes to believing what the government tells them. What do you think about that?
Rightfully so. I think that, no, I was not there. My husband was there in 2013, and he was saying at the time, any time that we hear that a tax is going to sunset, don't believe it, because that usually doesn't happen. People get used to paying it, and they say, oh, well, you're used to paying this. This is not an increase, and blah, blah, blah. Well, most of the time that ends up, happening. I think we need to keep our promise that this ends. Let's let it end. So yes, I'm definitely opposed to that too. I very frustrating up here because it is Republican-led legislature, and these should not be the issues that we're dealing with. These should not be on the table.
Well, and the other side says, if I can play devil's advocate, they say that they've kicked the can down the road as well. Now, I think the can we're kicking is actually we're just not cutting spending. Because the revenue is increasing every year to the government. We're just spending it instead of saving it to spend on roads. But they say we've kicked the can down the road to the point where, and I've even had legislators tell me, Julie, that they want to cut spending, but they've tried to have that conversation over the last several years. But there is no movement there. And in the meantime, the roads are degrading to a point where they get even more expensive to fix. If they get bad enough, you can't repair them. You have to redo them. That's what they say. So I guess I understand that argument, but I don't think the answer. I think there's got to be a better answer than taxing the people. I let you respond to that, but I also would like for you to talk a little bit about where this goes from here, because the more popular plan, or let's say the governor's plan, is going to be voted on today in the House, I believe. And if that passes, I wonder if your bill will even be heard in committee.
Well, I first will tell you, I don't believe it's going to be voted on today. It was not on our 2-day calendar and yesterday, so therefore it cannot be voted on today. So it'll probably be moved to Monday. It should have been. It passed on Tuesday. Typically, we would vote on it on Thursday, but it was not on our calendar. So I don't know the reason behind that, but they did not. It's not happening today. So we still have time to contact legislators and voice your opinion and make them think a little bit more about this plan. So I did want to say that. I'm forgetting the other question you asked.
Oh, no, it was just, you already answered it. You're not for the tax increases. I'm not for the tax increases. But what they say is we've kicked the can down the road because the roads are so degraded and they're crumbling and they get more expensive. If you let them get bad enough, they get even more expensive. So people are tired. Some people are telling me, they're like, well, it's like triage. I don't want to vote for the tax increase, but at the same time, the highway department, they're saying the roads are getting so bad that they get more expensive if you keep not funding them.
Right. And I do agree. That's why we need a plan, because it is more expensive. But that's why House Bill 1541 is a great way to go, because it doesn't hit all at once. It is a gradual 10% one year, 20% next year, and gradually increasing that income. We didn't have income tax cuts all in 1 year because that's very hard to do, to impose it all in 1 year. This is a very gradual plan. And again, if we get 5 years down the road and we say, this is not working out, I don't think we can continue at this pace, then you can come up with something else. And that's the beauty of it. Nothing happens too quickly. It's gradually transferring that money based on growth, based on that revenue growth. And then that also kind of controls the spending in some of the other areas. And when you have a budget that you have to stick to, you will find ways to trim it.
That's exactly right.
Just look at your own personal finances. When you don't have that money coming in the door, you will eat out less. You will buy less clothing. You will, you'll make a decision. Do we want to take this trip or not? I mean, whatever it is, you will adjust to that income. But it's certainly easier to adjust when it's done over time than when it's all at one time.
We're talking with State Representative Julie Mayberry, and she's the sponsor of this great bill, HB 1541, attempting to fund our roads without raising taxes. It's as simple as you can get. Now, what she's saying is it's not going to be heard today, and she's right. That means you have time. So it really just comes down to this. This really cruised through the Senate. If you don't want to pay more at the pump, then you need to call your legislator, and you just need to tell them, hey, I would really like for you to maybe look more at HB 1541 and not do the governor's plan, which is going to raise taxes, and the Senate's plan, which is going to raise taxes because we're taxed enough already. And I'm told, State Representative Mayberry, I'm told that it's not on today's calendar because it was amended yesterday to remove State Representative Brant Smith. Okay, so then I guess, is that why it's delayed? Because if you amend something, it's got to sit a little longer. Is that right?
It has to sit a little longer. That is part of it. But I didn't know if maybe the plan was to hold it as well anyway. Yeah. So anyway, I don't know the exact details on that, but he did remove his name. So I was very glad to see that. I hear some say, well, it's just a few pennies. What's 3 pennies? Well, let me just ask you this question and ask your listeners this question. If you're driving down the highway, which I'm sure there's people listening driving down the highway right now, you need gas. You pull over, you see one gas station that's $2.10, and across the street you see a gas station that's $2.13. Which gas station do you go to?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly
You go to
right.
the one that's $2.10. And I promise you, you're going to choose. If you don't choose that one, there's something a little odd.
Yep.
But you just prove to yourself that 3 pennies matters, and it continues, to go up. We're right now, we have gas prices that are on the lower side. I mean, I wish they were even lower than they are. But remember, our gas prices can go up $3, almost $4. We've experienced that. And I had people telling me, I have to choose whether I go to the grocery store or not, or, go to work. I've got to now carpool. I mean, it really does matter.
Last question.
Can add up.
Last question. The first part of this plan of the governor's plan are the tax increases, the new tax at the wholesale gas and diesel. The second provision is referring to the people to not let the tax sunset that was passed in 2012 and make it permanent. Do you consider that a new tax?
That's a very interesting question, because there is, I think, some debate on whether it will require 51 votes or 75 votes in the House to pass this tax on the increase in. And we have an amendment in our Constitution that says that if you increase a current tax, it requires the 75 votes in the House. So there is some question as to how many votes it actually will take to pass this.
Interesting.
And I don't know if that's been made really clear, but that is definitely something that we need to look at.
I agree. State Representative Julie Mayberry, we appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming up with creative ideas to not raise our taxes, and I think we need way more of that in Little Rock. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much.
All righty.
Thank you.
Folks,
okay.
We're going to take a break here, going to reset.
No illusions. We have great differences with both powers. We shall continue to have great differences. But peace depends on the ability of great powers to live together on the same planet despite their differences. We would not be true to our obligation to generations yet unborn if we failed to seize this moment to do everything in our power to ensure that we will be able to talk about those differences rather than to fight about them in the future. And as we look back over this century, let us in the highest spirit of bipartisanship recognize that we can be proud of our nation's record in foreign affairs. America has given more generously of itself toward maintaining freedom, preserving peace, alleviating human suffering around the globe than any nation has ever done in the history of man. We have fought 4 wars in this century, but our power has never been used to break the peace, only to keep it, never been used to destroy freedom, only to defend it. We now have within our reach the goal of ensuring that the next generation can be the first generation in this century to be spared the scourges of war. Turning to our problems at home, we are making progress toward our goal of a new prosperity without war. Industrial production, consumer spending, retail sales, personal income, all have been rising. Total employment, real income are the highest in history. New home building starts this past year reached the highest level ever. Business and consumer confidence have both been rising. Interest rates are down. The rate of inflation is down. We can look with confidence to 1972 as the year when the back of inflation will be broken. Now, this is a good record, but it is not good enough. Not when we still have an unemployment rate of 6%. It's not enough to point out that this was the rate of the early peacetime years of the 60s, or that if the more than 2 million men released from the
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. Are you a conservative-minded young person and want to let the world know about it? Are you tired of rolling your eyes as your professor regurgitates progressive, PC, neo-Marxist nonsense? Then you should interview on Conduit News Radio's Young Conservative segment and tell us about why you believe the way you do. Tell us how you came to be a conservative and what are your views on government. Now, if you're worried that your neo-Marxist professor may also be a right-wing talk radio listening masochist, then names can be changed to protect the innocent. It's the Conduit News Radio Conservative Future segment. To be interviewed, call 870-275-9799. That's 870-275-9799. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
Were still in their wartime jobs, and unemployment would be far lower. Our goal in this country is full employment in peacetime. We intend to meet that goal, and we can. The Congress has helped to meet that goal by passing our job-creating tax program last month. The historic monetary agreements that we've reached with the major European nations, Canada and Japan, will help meet it by providing new markets for American products, new jobs for American workers. Our budget will help meet it by being expansionary without being inflationary, a job-producing budget that will help take up the gap as the economy expands to full employment. Our program to raise farm income will help meet it by helping to revitalize rural America, by giving up to America's farmers their fair share of America's increasing productivity. And we also will help meet our goal of full employment at peacetime with a set of major initiatives to stimulate more imaginative use of America's great capacity for technological advance and direct it toward improving the quality of life for every American. In reaching the moon, we demonstrated what miracles American technology is capable of achieving. And now the time has come to move more deliberately toward making full use of that technology here on Earth, of harnessing the wonders of science to the service of man. I shall soon send to the Congress a special message proposing a new program of federal partnership in technological research and development, with federal incentives to increase private research, federally supported research and projects designed to improve our everyday lives in ways that will range from improving mass transit to developing new systems of emergency health care that could save thousands of lives annually. Historically, our superior technology and high productivity have made it possible for American workers to be the highest paid in the world by far, and yet for our goods still to compete in world markets. Now we face a new situation. As other nations move rapidly forward in technology, the answer to the new competition is not to build a wall around America, but rather to remain competitive by improving our own technology still further and by increasing productivity in American industry. Our new monetary and trade agreements will make it possible for American goods to compete fairly in the world's markets, but they still must compete. The new technology programs will put to use the skills of many highly trained Americans, skills that might otherwise be wasted. I will also meet the growing technological challenge from abroad, and it will thus help to create new industries as well as creating more jobs for America's workers in producing for the world's markets. This second session of the 92nd Congress already has before it more than 90 major administration proposals which still await action. I have discussed these in the extensive written message that I have presented to the Congress today. They include, among others, our programs to improve life for the aging, to combat crime and drug abuse, to improve health service, to ensure that no one will be denied needed health care because of inability to pay, to protect workers' pensions rights, to promote equal opportunity for members of minorities and others who have been left behind, to expand consumer protection, to improve the environment, to revitalize rural America, to help the cities, to launch new initiatives.
Bill on there, that's actually the top of the list, House Bill 1321, which is a homestead property tax credit increase. So that's not a tax increase, it's a tax credit increase. So it's think of it like a tax cut. It's by State Representative Lanny Fight, a Republican from Benton, and he joins us now on the phone. State Representative Lanny Fight, thank you so much for coming on, sir.
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
Yes, sir. So why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about how this idea came to you and why you wanted to do it.
Okay. House Bill 1321, what it does, everyone who owns their house gets a property tax credit. Right now, that tax credit is $350 that comes straight off your taxes. And I proposed to increase it to $375, and we had a fund balance of $104 million, which I believe was created from the Amazon tax that went on here last year. And also, we've got good growth in our state right now. So that was what caused that fund balance of $104 million. And it would only cost $12.5 million to increase it from $350 to $375. And then I wanted to put that balance in an interim study and see how we could turn it back to the people, or maybe cut the tax itself. A half-cent sales tax funds this property tax relief. And that was the purpose of my bill right there.
Wow. So you're saying we got this fund with like $110 million in it, and you're saying, hey, you know what? If we raise that tax credit $25, for everybody out there that's owning a home, then that's only cost $12 million out of that 110.
Right. And wow. And we need to see over the next 2 years while that interim study's going. We would determine if that number is not an outlier, which I don't think it is, and see how much it increases. And then that would tell us how much we could increase the property tax relief, or say we could cut the sales tax that funds that too also,
Wow.
That's one of the things I would like to study in the interim study.
Yeah, so this is kind of like a wait and see. It's kind of a gradual approach. A lot of people might say, hey, now I get a credit of $25 extra. That's not very much. But, with the way things are going right now, Lanny, I kind of think anything that's good for the taxpayer, any amount of money that's going back into the pockets of the taxpayer is something to celebrate.
Yes. Back in 1979, what had happened, a lot of the counties, nearly all the counties had quit assessing, and Amendment 79 came along, and everybody was forced into going back to reassessing the properties like they should. And so to give relief to the people, they passed Amendment 79, which guarantees a $300 tax credit. But as this fund grows and this money, the people are paying this money, and it's the people's money, and it should be turned back to them if there's surplus in that. And that's my feelings.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, just on if you just look at what the bill does point by point, the reason I'm so interested in it, State Representative Fight, is because it improves economic freedom, because it's just allowing us to keep more of our money if you use the tax credit each year. Matter of fact, I got a funny story on this. I guess a couple of years ago,
Talk of Northeast Arkansas. This is News Talk 101.3 FM and 12:30 AM KBTM Jonesboro, an EAB radio station.
In education, to improve transportation, and to put an end to costly labor tie-ups in transportation. The West Coast dock strike is a case in point. This nation cannot and will not tolerate that kind of irresponsible labor tie-up in the future. The messages also include basic reforms which are essential if our structure of government is to be adequate in the decades ahead. They include reform of our wasteful and outmoded welfare system, substitution of a new system that provides work requirements and work incentives for those who can help themselves, income support for those who cannot help themselves, and fairness to the working poor. They include a $17 billion program of federal revenue sharing with the states and localities as an investment in their renewal, an investment also of faith in the American people. They also include a sweeping reorganization of the executive branch of the federal government so that it will be more efficient, more responsive, and able to meet the challenges of the decades ahead. 1 year ago, standing in this place, I laid before the opening session of this Congress 6 great goals. One of these was welfare reform. That proposal has been before the Congress now for nearly 2.5 years. My proposals on revenue sharing, government reorganization, health care, and the environment have now been before the Congress for nearly a year. Many of the other major proposals that I have referred to have been here that long or longer. Now, 1971, we can say, was a year of consideration of these measures. Now let us join in making 1972 a year of action on them. Action by the Congress for the nation and for the people of America. Now, in addition, there's one pressing need which I have not previously covered, but which must be placed on the national agenda. We long have looked in this nation to the local property tax as the main source of financing for public primary and secondary education. As a result, soaring school costs, soaring property tax rates now threaten both our communities and our schools. They threaten communities because property taxes, which more than doubled in the 10 years from 1960 to 70, have become one of the most oppressive and discriminatory of all taxes, hitting most cruelly at the elderly and the retired. And they threaten schools as hard-pressed voters understandably reject new bond issues at the polls. The problem has been given even greater urgency by 4 recent court decisions, which have held that the conventional method of financing schools through local property taxes is discriminatory and unconstitutional. Nearly 2 years ago, I named a special presidential commission to study the problems of school finance, and I also directed the federal departments to look into the same problems. We are developing comprehensive proposals to meet these problems. This issue involves 2 complex and interrelated set of problems: support of the schools and the basic relationships of federal, state, and local government in any tax reforms. Under the leadership of the Secretary of the Treasury, we are carefully reviewing all of the tax aspects. And I have this week enlisted the Advisory Committee on Intergovernmental Relations in addressing the intergovernmental relations aspects. I have asked this bipartisan commission to review our proposal for federal action to cope with the gathering crisis of school finance and property taxes. Later in the year, when both commissions have completed their studies, I shall make my final recommendations for relieving the burden of property taxes and providing both fair and adequate financing for our children's education. These recommendations will be revolutionary. But all these recommendations, however, will be rooted in one fundamental principle with which there can be no compromise. Local school boards must have control over local schools.
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
Hey folks, you're listening to the best of Conduit News Radio with me, Paul Harrell. Our coverage of the 92nd General Assembly, and welcome to the program. We have a member of that assembly, State Representative Dan Sullivan, on the phone. He is commuting to Little Rock right now. Dan, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fine, Paul. And I have pulled over to the side of the road, so I'm not using my phone illegally. I'm off the side here in Bald Knob. And I don't have my gun open carry either.
Oh,
so I'm in good shape down here in Bald Knob.
I see what you're saying. I think that's great. There's been some positive things happening when it comes to recognition out of the House, passing that resolution saying that we're a constitutional carry state.
Yeah, and Paul, let me just share with people, especially in Northeast Arkansas. I know the NRA is having a big Friends of the NRA banquet coming up here in the next few days. I just recently let my NRA membership expire. In the NRA, I feel like did not treat the legislature, those of us who have been great advocates for the NRA, we kind of got it put to us last session. We try to follow what they do and listen to their counsel, and as a result of that, they gave me and a number of other legislators an A- rating. Through no fault of the legislatures, and I think the fault was with the NRA. And we had a pretty lengthy discussion with their representative and asked them to consider changing that rating, and they did not. So, Paul, I am letting my NRA membership expire, and I'll be going to the Gun Owners of America Association. I will not be attending the NRA banquet this year for the first time in quite a while. And I would just ask your listeners to consider what the NRA is doing in supporting our legislature, who's been strongly supportive of all gun rights.
Yeah. But yeah, you know what you referenced, Dan, I definitely saw some of that. You know, I was scratching my head 2 years ago with with what the NRA was allowing to happen, under the guise of Second Amendment, but it was actually more restrictions and more red tape. And the Gun Owners of America, they're no joke. They don't play around when it comes to understanding that the Second Amendment is what it is. It says what it says, and it's. Go ahead.
Yeah, that blends in with Chris Ann Hall's being here in Arkansas this week. Just a fantastic series of meetings all around the state. And Paul, I'm going to read a short quote from Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson said, "I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of society but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it away from them, but to inform their discretion by education. This is the true corrective of abuses of constitutional power." And that's exactly what Chris Ann Hall did this week. It's exactly what Patriots of 746 are doing. It's exactly what the Liberty Coalition is doing, is starting to inform people. And they're gaining a lot of support statewide for understanding what our constitutional rights are. And these groups of people are starting to meet small. It reminds me of the power the Tea Party had several years ago.
I agree.
And it's just so exciting. It's so exciting to hear people like Chris Ann talking about the Constitution, about these groups. And I don't know, what did 746 grow from 3 or 4, maybe 100 to 17 or 13,000 now?
Yeah, 17,000. Yeah.
17,000. And it's really impactful. And it's exactly what Jefferson talked about. When people are uninformed, they're going to make wrong decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about us helping educate the people rather than take their power away, which a central government will do, state or federal, and about educating the people so they understand what their powers and authorities are.
Yeah. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. We're talking with State Representative Dan Sullivan. Okay, Dan, the highway plan, half of the highway plan that includes tax increases on gas and diesel at the wholesale level, it sailed through the Senate last week, and it's expected to go through the House this week. Can you give us your thoughts on the plan?
Sure, and I'd be glad to, and I appreciate the question. Right now, I'm not going to be able to support the tax increase for a couple of reasons. You know, as I look at it, Paul, although bankruptcy is not exactly like a tax increase, they both fundamentally say that we have to tighten our belt first. You know, if one declares bankruptcy or one is considering it, they have to go to the courts and the lawyers to decide on a plan to make sure you've tightened your belt first. Well, here, you know, I think, and from my observations, there's a number of things that we haven't done, tightening our belt and looking at cost reductions before we go to the last resort of increasing taxes. Unfortunately, for our government, it seems like that's the path of least resistance. We think we can message this correctly, and the taxpayer will say, yeah, there's nothing else we can do. But when you're down in Little Rock and you're engaged in these things, you understand there's all kinds of ways that we can tighten our belt. You know, Paul, I don't want to go into too much detail, but we had a whole year we went through with the federal government on what was called the Paris match, where we submit all of our Medicaid recipients to the feds, and they cross-match that with other people in other states. It turned out that we had what DHS said was a glitch. And when I dug into what a glitch meant, it turns out it was a lot more than just a glitch. It turns out we were paying $500 a month for about 10 to 12,000 people for about 9 to 12 months. Now, I don't know if your listeners have their phone handy or their calculator handy, but multiply 500 times 12 times 12. That's millions of dollars. And we had contractors that were supposed to be managing that for us. And those contractors, as far as I know, have not been held accountable for the loss of, you know, even if you say, well, that wasn't all Arkansas money, it was some federal money, it was still the taxpayers' money. And I reach out, I think that calculates to above $60 million that the taxpayers pay. You know, we look at other things that are coming down, and I know the governor and his staff have said that, you know, he's going to cut taxes and raise taxes and it's cost neutral. Well, that's probably true, and you may, and if you accept that as true, and I'll give him that, then we as legislators have to look at other taxes that are coming up. It's not just what's proposed here in this one. You know, they're proposing a 911 tax on your cell phone.
Yep.
And truly our current 911 system is not what we need. We need to upgrade it. It's a safety issue. But the governor's tax plan that balances doesn't include that. Nor does it, at this time, I think, include the internet sales tax and other fees that we're looking at raising. And as a legislator, you know, I can't just balance what the governor's tax plan is on highways as a standalone. I have to balance what all these fee increases, what all those taxes are at the end of the day. I know you've said a number of times that at the end of the session, are the taxpayers paying more or paying less? So it's not, you can't really make this highway tax plan just a standalone. You have to put them all together.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's kind of the path of least resistance is to increase that. You know, Paul, I just found out the other day, and I don't know the details, and I'm very cautious about rolling this out, and I hope to come back on when I know the details. But, you know, the taxpayer pays association dues for all state agencies. So now let that sink in just a minute. Mm-hmm. If you have a member of a state agency, DHS, or other state agencies, we are paying, and that would be for our colleges too, or universities, we are paying, taxpayers pay association dues to the tune of $6.7 million.
Wow.
Now let that soak in, and there may very well be some dues that we need and should pay. But most of your people in the private sector, they assume that cost if they join and pay for their association, their professional dues, they're paying that. But we at the state level are paying $6.7 million. And I think before I vote for a tax plan, I want to know just what it is we're paying.
Yeah.
And if we can cut that down to $2 million or $3 million, fine. But we need to look at all of those things before we take that path of least resistance and increase the taxes on the taxpayer.
We're talking with Dan Sullivan, State Representative for District 53. He's pulled over on the side of the road en route to Little Rock. You know, on the paying association dues, I mean, that's what the biggest lobby down there is, government lobbying for government. It's these government associations and things like that. That's what struck me, you know, as you're down there long enough. And so you've always wondered maybe why. Well, if they're mandatorily, or if the taxpayers are paying for these individuals to be a member of these associations, I mean, that to me is, I didn't know that. I didn't know that, Dan.
I didn't either. But I'll tell you, I have never had a state agency lobby me. Matter of fact, they've taken great pains not to. If I ask a question, they'll inform me answer my questions for me, and they'll help me learn more. But I have not had, and this is my third term, not had a representative from the state agency, DHS, the governor's office, or anywhere. I've not had one come up and say, we really need your vote here, or really need your vote there. So, you know, I think I really want to look into this, though. I tell you, you just had the guest prior to me was talking about, you know, the gambling and the casino issue.
David Colbert.
Well, that's another one. Yeah, that's just another one that I have a hard time supporting. You know, we went through the whole deal with the tax on cigarettes, and we needed the money, we needed the revenue, so we taxed the vice, and we taxed the vice more, and we taxed the vice more. We finally bled it dry until we had the federal courts come out, you know, and we had all the smoking settlements and all of that. Now we've bled that dry. So then our next course of action is to find another vice to tax. And we'll tax it more and tax it more until we finally bleed that dry. And we'll have to find another vice to tax to keep up state revenues. I wonder what the next vice we'll tax is. Because that seems to be, and you know, Chris Ann, you quoted Chris Ann as saying, if we don't learn from the mistakes of history, we'll continue to make the mistakes. It's a mistake to leverage taxes on a vice as a foundational principle for funding highways. Now, if you want to tax them a little bit, fine. You know, we tax a lot of vices. We tax Twinkies and everything else. So if we're going to do that, I understand that, and I support that. However, to make it a fundamental principle and a foundational principle for funding our highways is not a long-term solution in my mind. So, you know, when I talk about I can't support the highway bill, it's not just one thing. It's not just being against taxes. It's because I believe we're fundamentally building on a foundation that isn't sustainable. And I believe that we have not done all that we can to tighten our belt before we pass that tax on to the people. Maybe if we tightened our belt, I would support a 1 cent tax or a 3 cent tax. But I think there's more that we can do to lower that tax on the people, and that we need to do before we just take, again, the path of least resistance is convince the people there's a huge need out there, our crisis.
Yeah.
And admittedly, there's a big problem. I'll sure admit that.
And the next vice, you were talking about the next vice, Dan, it's clearly marijuana. I mean, that's what it's going to be.
Or others. I mean, there are plenty of vices out there.
Yeah. Well, you raised some interesting points, Dan Sullivan. I mean, you really do, and I appreciate it. I appreciate your stance on not, wanting to raise taxes. You're not the first person that I have heard that is uncomfortable funding roads with casino revenue. Now, I mean, I know it makes great sense on paper, but after that interview with Mr. Colbert last hour, and you really understand the mental health aspects of gambling and the addictions that nobody ever talks about. I mean, he was a wealth of knowledge. You start thinking, hang on, wait a second. Yeah, we'll have better roads eventually because we're going to have the money, but at what cost? What cost? What's the societal cost?
It's the same thing with tobacco. I mean, we put the tax up so high that people had to quit smoking, and when they quit, our revenues went down.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're going to tax, and then the lesson we learned from that is people got sick, and we had that cost also. And so now the lesson learned would be what? If we're going to tax a vice, we're going to tax it and create less of it, which means we have to increase the taxes on the vice to sustain the revenue levels, and eventually those revenue levels diminish or level out, and our costs don't.
Mm-hmm.
It just is not a foundational principle of taxing vices to create revenue is not a foundational principle.
Yeah. All right. So, Dan, tell me about this Is it a resolution that you were backing and has to do with, is it pronounced Fong Gong? And,
yes,
tell me about that.
Yeah, many of your people may have seen it. It's been on public television and other documentaries where it's a spiritual group in China, primarily, that are being imprisoned.
As we look ahead over the coming decades, vast new growth and change are not only certainties, they will be the dominant reality of this world, and particularly of our life in America. Surveying the certainty of rapid change, we can be like a fallen rider caught in the stirrups, or we can sit high in the saddle, the masters of change, directing it on a course we choose. The secret of mastering change in today's world is to reach back to old and proven principles and to adapt them with imagination and intelligence to the new realities of a new age. And that's what we have done in the proposals that I've laid before the Congress. They are rooted in basic principles that are as enduring as human nature, as robust as the American experience, and they are responsive to new conditions. Thus, they represent a spirit of change that is truly renewal. As we look back at those old principles, we find them as timely as they are timeless. We believe in independence and self-reliance and the creative value of the competitive spirit. We believe in full and equal opportunity for all Americans and in the protection of individual rights and liberties. We believe in the family as the keystone of the community, and the community as the keystone of the nation. We believe in compassion toward those in need. We believe in a system of law, justice, and order as the basis of a genuinely free society. We believe that a person should get what he works for, and that those who can should work for what they get. We believe in the capacity of people to make their own decisions in their own lives, in their own communities, and we believe in their right to make those decisions. In applying these principles, we have done so with the full understanding that what we seek in the 70s, what our quest is not merely for more, but for better. For a better quality of life for all Americans. Thus, for example, we are giving a new measure of attention to cleaning up our air and water, making our surroundings more attractive. We're providing broader support for the arts, helping stimulate a deeper appreciation of what they can contribute to the nation's activities and to our individual lives. But nothing really matters more to the quality of our lives than the way we treat one another. than our capacity to live respectfully together as a unified society with a full and generous regard for the rights of others and also for the feelings of others. As we recover from the turmoil and violence of recent years, as we learn once again to speak with one another.
For their spiritual beliefs, and folks, they're not Christians, they wouldn't believe like you and I, probably nowhere close. However, in China, they're being put in prison, and because of their religion, and China is doing anywhere from 60,000 to 100,000 organ transplants a year. Now, if you do that in the States, there's a tracking mechanism that tracks where the organs came from, where they're going. There's a, where it went, who did it, who did all the services. And China doesn't have any tracking like that. So they are imprisoning the Falun Gong and then harvesting their organs in order to sell them on the market. And then there's no tracking procedure. So you have people from all over the world going to China, getting these organs, being harvested primarily from these prisoners of conscience.
Wow.
And given to these folks as a revenue stream. And as a result of that, our U.S. Congress had a very similar resolution, almost the same one that we passed in Arkansas, that passed unanimously in the U.S. Congress, and it passed unanimously in the Arkansas House. So I was really, it started out like a lot of things do. You get a call as a legislator and saying, can you help us out? Would you meet with us? And I met with representatives of the Falun Gong, and again, we don't share religious beliefs at all, but we share a passion for life and the right to life.
Yeah.
And the right for people to have some, be able to have all the tracking that goes on here in the U.S. when these organs are harvested.
That's got to be a big business. That's got to be a big business. Let me ask you this. You said it was unanimous. So you're saying Democrats supported a resolution condemning what's going on with the Falun Gong?
Correct. And it just seems a little bit, and I'm thankful for every time someone stands for life. I appreciate that vote. And it's just I find it a little bit concerning that people would be opposed to harvesting an organ, but they're okay with harvesting a fetus. And I struggle with that a little bit. And again, I appreciate the support.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the support for this and hope that as a nation and as a state, we can grow. And it's really a step in the right direction, Paul, for people to recognize how important life is and how important that is. So it's a good step. And although it does seem to me a little bit hypocritical, it is a step in the right direction. And I want to encourage all. I appreciate the votes of every Democrat that supports that.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I also see the hypocrisy of being for abortion and being for this resolution. Hey, let me ask you this, Dan. Have any of your Democrat colleagues, who are Arkansas Democrats, have they ever pulled you to the side or anything and off the record confessed man, I wish our party wasn't so pro-abortion? Has that ever happened to you? Because it's happened to me. I've talked with one who said, we just, but they don't want to say that publicly,
Well, I've had it happen with some Democrats, not with any legislators. Hey, Paul, I want to jump backwards just a second. I left out a point. One of the things this is Scope Week, and last week was.
Yes.
All the opportunities we had in Scope Week to increase business, economic development. When we have these, and other states are using it, advanced practice nurses, people are leaving the state. These are high-paying jobs, leaving the state. So all of these scope bills that have been defeated by some of the wealthiest people in Arkansas are lobbying and killing these bills that would help in economic development, help in economic...
As we look ahead over the coming decades, vast new growth and change are not only certainties, they will be the dominant reality of this world, and particularly of our life in America. Surveying the certainty of rapid change, we can be like a fallen rider caught in the stirrups, or we can sit high in the saddle, the masters of change, directing it on a course we choose. The secret of mastering change in today's world is to reach back to old and proven principles and to adapt them with imagination and intelligence to the new realities of a new age. And that's what we have done in the proposals that I've laid before the Congress. They are rooted in basic principles that are as enduring as human nature, as robust as the American experience, and they are responsive to new conditions. Thus, they represent a spirit of change that is truly renewal. As we look back at those old principles, we find them as timely as they are timeless. We believe in independence and self-reliance and the creative value of the competitive spirit. We believe in full and equal opportunity for all Americans and in the protection of individual rights.
First of all, are you nice?
We believe
do you
in
really
the
enjoy
family
meeting
as the
new people?
keystone of the community,
and most
the
of
community
all,
is the
do you
keystone of the
love to
nation.
help people?
We believe in compassion.
If you answered yes to these
for those in
questions
need.
and you're willing to work really
We
hard for
believe in a
great
system
pay,
of
then a
law,
career in radio
justice,
sales
and
may be
order
right for you.
as the
The number one
basis
characteristic of a great radio salesperson is the
free
ability to
society.
relate and have a genuine concern
We
about
believe
helping
that a person
people grow their
should get what he
business.
works
At
for.
EAB of Jonesboro, we have
And that
incredible
those who
heritage
can
stations,
should
including
work
the
for what
legendary
they get.
107.9 K-Fine,
We
Kiss
believe in the
FM.
capacity of people to make their own decisions in their own lives, in their own communities, and we believe in their right to make those decisions. In applying these principles, we have done so with the full understanding that what we seek in the 70s, what our quest is not merely for more, but for better. For a better quality of life for all Americans. Thus, for example, we are giving a new measure of attention to cleaning up our air and water, making our surroundings more attractive. We're providing broader support for the arts, helping stimulate a deeper appreciation of what they can contribute to the nation's activities and to our individual lives. But nothing really matters more to the quality of our lives than the way we treat one another, than our capacity to live respectfully together as a unified society, with a full and generous regard for the rights of others and also for the feelings of others. As we recover from the turmoil and violence of recent years, as we learn once again to speak with one another instead of shouting at one another, we are regaining that capacity. As is customary here on this occasion,
All right, we're here with State Representative Josh Miller. We are inside the actual Public Health Committee room. And, of course, we're in the middle of Scope Week. And let me just ask, for 2 weeks, yeah. So Scope Weeks is Scope Weeks. And it's so frustrating sometimes from my standpoint, Josh. You kind of wish it was about Scope mouthwash instead of medical practice. So how do you approach Scope Week or Scope Weeks?
I approach it with quite a bit of trepidation. Number one, because, like I'm just a regular guy. I'm not a doctor. Never been to medical school. I have had a crash course in medicine, but every other year when we're in session, a bunch of legislators, folks like myself, and some of which are a lot smarter than me, we're all asked to make decisions about how medicine is going to be practiced and carried out in the state of Arkansas, and we have to experience all these different groups and genres of healthcare providers who come down here to have their urinating contest for a week or two every other year, and it gets old, because I feel like we ought to be if we spent as much time debating policy and saving taxpayer money and all this stuff, and left some of the scope of practice stuff up to people who are actually professionals. Like this week has made me wonder why we have a medical board. Public Health Committee might as well be the medical board.
Yeah, so elaborate on that. How so? How so?
Well, I mean, we're deciding what what doctors can do, what nurses can do, what eye doctors can do, what eye surgeons can do, all this kind of stuff, and then I guess basically the medical board's job is just to monitor it from there on out. But it kind of makes you question our process at times when it comes down to 20 of us on the House Public Health Committee, and we decide what bills that we're going to put out, scope of practice bills that we're going to put out to the session and move over to the Senate or receive from the Senate or whatever. I guess and many of us are not trained medical professionals. Mm-hmm. So we're given
some on the committee are, though, and that's always interesting. And I'll say this, from what I can tell, the medical society, they seem to oppose nearly everything that's going to give the consumer more choice and more freedom, potentially lower the cost of health care. And this has to do with a lot of times, first of all, advanced practice nurses, that's failed. The optometrist extension of scope of practice to do things they're already trained to do, that's failed. I've realized in watching a lot of this, the medical society is extremely powerful.
They can be. They typically leave me alone, but no, they are, and it's like nobody else needs to get a piece of their pie, so to speak. And again, to me, a lot of this stuff just boils down to freedom. Hey, look, I may not want to go see an advanced practice nurse. I may want to go see a doctor, but I don't think there's anything wrong with me having that choice. But the medical society usually disagrees with all that kind of stuff.
We're talking with State Representative Josh Miller. He's Republican from District 66. That's in Cleburne County. So you've run some bills in the past that tried to get Medicaid expansion under control. You've not ever been a fan of Medicaid expansion, which is a good thing. And specifically with scope of practice, this is my opinion, so you feel free to agree or disagree. But this particular committee, I think, has been designed to protect from any potential changes in Arkansas Works or Medicaid expansion. I think if something like that were tried, I don't necessarily think it would work or go through. I don't think the Democrats would be for it, and I think there'd be certain enough Republicans to not be for it. And I don't think it's a coincidence that because that program is all about control, that this committee is having such a hard time increasing scope of practice. I think the two go hand in hand because I think both are not about freedom. They're about, government dictating who gets what. Feel free to disagree with me.
Well, that's a different angle to think about for sure, and I don't know that I would disagree all that much. I would, probably plug in here that we all have to keep in mind that we are just the lowly legislature, and we must first run things by Blue Cross Blue Shield in order to see if it can actually be put into law. They are the third or fourth or fifth branch of government that we have here in the state of Arkansas, unfortunately. And I say that, jokingly, but sadly, you've been around enough to know it's true. If Blue Cross is going to be against it, it's going to be it's going to be tough to get past. And so, scope of practice stuff does get very frustrating. As far as the Medicaid expansion goes, I think we're going to have an opportunity to find out, possibly here before the session's over, if there's enough legislators that are willing to look at it and say, hey, we need to make some changes to do this more affordably and more efficiently. I don't think Medicaid expansion is going to go away. I've advocated for that for years. I think, now we're almost to the point of let's, if we can't make it go away, let's try to do it more efficiently. And, I, for one, think the first step we need to do in that is getting rid of the insurance companies. They're
you mean the component of the private in the private option, meaning the state pays the insurance companies directly, taxpayer dollars?
Basically, you could say the Medicaid expansion's private parts. They need to go away. It's written in the law, in the waiver deal that we did back in 2013. The insurance companies are guaranteed 20% profit margin.
That's to me that is so criminal. I know it's in the law, so it's legal, but that is just selling the people out, man, to make sure that we make these companies profitable with taxpayer money.
Well, and I'm definitely not going to disagree with that. And the problem is that DHS has had to come up with the money as our percentage of what the state has to pay out for these premiums has gone up, and a lot of times that's come at the expense of some of our most vulnerable populations. With getting services cut, hours of services cut, so forth and so on, so that DHS can scrap together the money. And again, keep in mind, 20% of that's profit for Blue Cross and Centene.
You mentioned we're talking with State Representative Josh Miller. We're inside the House Public Health Committee room. It's been about, I guess, an hour since you guys adjourned this morning. You're just going to come back and hear some more scope of practice bills. You mentioned Blue Cross and Blue Shield. There's been some talk of ethics reform this session. There has been, obviously, we have the legislature now admitting that there's a problem, at least with public perception. You have former legislators who have gone to jail. You have some who are, some who have been exposed as potential conflicts of interest. We have some people, openly admitting, hey, I'm voting on this, but I may have a conflict, or I have a conflict, so I'm not going to vote on this, so that's good. But former Senator Brian King, he had a Medicaid disclosure bill that would have, I think, helped greatly in educating the public, but there is no Medicaid disclosure. No one's bringing that bill back. They seem to be doing some things that I think might be beneficial, eliminating the pension if you're convicted of a crime. That's definitely a disincentive. And maybe a few others, but I feel like in order to be serious after what we've seen with all this Medicaid bribery or alleged bribery, I think we need Medicaid disclosure. What do you think?
I absolutely 100% agree. Matter of fact, I was the House sponsor on Senator King's disclosure bill, and it didn't. I don't know that something very similar is not going to be brought back up this session. And what that bill did was just simply said, hey, if you're doing business with a Medicaid provider, and you, I think it was like $10,000 a year. If you're doing more than $10,000 a year with a Medicaid provider, you just needed to disclose. We can't let a lobbyist buy our lunch. We have to disclose if every little thing. It's such a pain in the butt to do a statement of financial interest anymore. To serve. I'm happy to do it. I think it's ethical and good that we do, but I also think it's a joke that we don't. If somebody is doing, if their private business is doing more than $10,000 a year with a Medicaid provider, such as a hospital, nursing home, insurance company, what have you, they just ought to have to disclose that. You've got to be living under a rock to not think, hey, if I'm doing $50,000 a year worth of business with some entity that's a Medicaid provider, you bet your hind end that they're going to have my ear when it comes to voting on issues of Medicaid. It just, maybe the folks in their district ought to know that going in. It doesn't make it illegal, and it's not illegal. And I'm not even saying it should be illegal. Just make it known, make it public. But anyway, that went
So you think that might come back up? We might actually get another vote on something similar to that legislation from 2 years ago.
I have heard quite a bit of talk about that, and so I'm not willing to say right now that I don't know for sure, but I hope that it does. Definitely.
We're talking again with State Representative Josh Miller. Real quick, let's talk about highways, funding the roads. There seems to be the consensus that it's going to be about tax increases on wholesale gas, wholesale diesel. Julie Mayberry does have a competing plan, but it doesn't look like that's going to. It looks like this thing's going to run Monday or Tuesday, and if that happens, then I don't think the competing plan that's out there that doesn't raise taxes. What are your thoughts on this? Because the roads, people want good roads. Everyone agrees that they want good roads, but it seems like the only way to fund it is with tax increases. Do you agree with that? Is that the only way to fund the roads?
I absolutely do not agree with that. I agree. Hey, look, I want good roads. Everybody wants good roads. We need good roads. Matter of fact, and I would caution people when they get real critical of our Department of Transportation or Highway Department or whatever. In my opinion, Scott Bennett ought to consider running for governor one day, because the guy has done an amazing job with no more than what we've given him throughout the years. Honestly, when you look at where all we designate money and where we spend money and appropriate this, that, and the other, it's ridiculous that we give so little to highways. But Representative Mayberry's plan is excellent plan. I co-sponsored that. We tried to run that in 2013 when I was a freshman, and it failed. Governor Beebe didn't want to do it. But we can definitely be funding our roads without having to raise taxes. I mean, I would have been okay. I voted for the tax cut that the governor put out here a couple of weeks ago, the $97 million deal. And I, hey, I appreciate that. I think the state's going to benefit from that.
Me too.
But I would have been okay also if we'd said, okay, we're not going to do this tax cut. Instead, we're going to put $97 million in the highway department. And I think that would have sold as well. But that's not the case. And I can't be supporting raising more taxes because we've just cut. At this point, I think when I first ran, I told folks in my district I wasn't going to vote for anything that was going to result in a net increase in taxes.
Yep.
And at this point, I haven't been shown how that if we carry this plan out, that it's not going to be a net increase in taxes for some folks. So,
does that also go for the other part of the highway plan, the half-cent sales tax that's got a sunset? Former State Representative Jonathan Barnett in 2011 on the House floor said it was temporary. That's how it was sold. That's how the people voted on it. Do you think referring it back to the voters to now make it permanent, are you supportive of that?
No, well, I voted against that yesterday in committee because that's not a what folks need to understand also is that is not we're not just carrying on the same tax because the tax that Representative Barnett ran and they talked about in 2011 actually did sunset. I mean, this is that tax is going away, so we're going to create a new one that takes its place. And that's going to be what is, assuming that it passes out of the House floor and so forth, is going to be what is put on the ballot.
Majority Leader Republican Marcus Richmond, he was in the Gazette, and he seemed to think that the second part of the plan, this referral to keep the half-cent sales tax, again, a new vote to create a new tax, as you say, he says it may have a much harder time than the first part of the plan to get that 51 votes. What are your thoughts?
I doubt it will. I hope it does. I mean, obviously, I'm against it. I'm going to vote no. But it only has to have a simple majority, 51 votes, and that's not too hard to get when the second floor is behind it.
Yeah. Now, some people are saying that it might actually need. It was Julie Mayberry. She was saying on the program the other day that maybe it needs 75% because it's a current tax. Now, I don't know if that's the case, but certainly might be an interesting challenge to what the threshold is.
We probably should go check with one of our 11,472 lawyers that we have on staff over here at the Bureau of Legislative Research to find out exactly. I don't know that it does because it's not a current tax. It's creating a new deal, and so that would be my question. But again, I'm not for it. I think we give $800 million right now, over $800 million, which just in my time down here in the legislature in the last 6 years has gone from when I first came in, we were given just over $700 million to higher ed. Now it's just over $800 million to higher ed, and I haven't seen tuition going down. Yeah. And I think Representative Payton or somebody made the point the other day in committee that maybe we ought to be referring to the people. Our tax increase to fund higher ed, and let's just fund our roads first.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And higher ed is just an example. I'm not trying to pick on higher ed.
Well, you got to have roads to drive to the college.
Right. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of folks don't take miles and miles of dirt roads to get to the University of Arkansas. And so, it's again, I think it's a matter of prioritization. And obviously, folks, the political opinion is folks would be more willing to raise the amount that they pay in taxes to have better roads than they would be probably to have nicer dormitories.
Yeah, that's true.
And so that's where we're at. But again, I just can't support it because I think we need to, what's government set up to do? I think our main responsibilities are K through 12 education, and then we're supposed to take care of our most vulnerable citizens, and we're supposed to provide infrastructure.
Yeah.
And if we prioritize our spending, we can do just that, and we don't have to raise taxes. As a matter of fact, we could continue to cut them.
State Representative Josh Miller, thank you so much. It's always great to talk to you.
Hey, thanks for having me on, bud.
I've been talking about programs. Programs are important. But even more important than programs is what we are as a nation, what we mean as a nation to ourselves and to the world. In New York Harbor stands one of the most famous statues in the world, the Statue of Liberty, the gift in 1886 of the people of France to the people of the United States. This statue is more than a landmark. It is a symbol of what America has meant to the world. It reminds us that what America has meant is not its wealth and not its power, but its spirit and purpose, a land that enshrines liberty and opportunity, and that has held out a hand of welcome to millions in search of a better and a fuller and a...
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. Are you a conservative-minded young person and want to let the world know about it? Are you tired of rolling your eyes as your professor regurgitates progressive, PC, neo-Marxist nonsense? Then you should interview on Conduit News Radio's Young Conservative segment and tell us about why you believe the way you do. Tell us how you came to be a conservative and what are your views on government. Now, if you're worried that your neo-Marxist professor may also be a right-wing talk radio listening masochist, then names can be changed to protect the innocent. It's the Conduit News Radio Conservative Future segment. To be interviewed, call 870-275-9799. That's 870-275-9799. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
All a freer life. The world's hopes poured into America along with its people. And those hopes, those dreams that have been brought here from every corner of the world have become a part of the hope that we now hold out to the world. 4 years from now, America will celebrate the 200th anniversary of its founding as a nation. And there are those who say that the old spirit of '76 is dead, that we no longer have the strength of character, the idealism, the faith in our founding purposes that spirit represents. Those who say this do not know America. We have been undergoing self-doubts and self-criticism. But these are only the other side of our growing sensitivity to the persistence of want in the midst of plenty, of our impatience with the slowness with which age-old ills are being overcome. If we were indifferent to the shortcomings of our society, or complacent about our institutions, or blind to the lingering inequities, then we would have lost our way. But the fact that we have those concerns is evidence that our ideals, deep down, are still strong. Indeed, they remind us that what is really best about America is its compassion. They remind us that in the final analysis, America is great, not because it is strong, not because it is rich, but because this is a good country. Let us reject the narrow visions of those who would tell us that we are evil because we are not yet perfect, that we are corrupt because we are not yet pure, that all the sweat and toil and sacrifice that have gone into the building of America were for naught because the building is not yet done. Let us see that the path we are traveling is wide, with room in it for all of us, and that its direction is toward a better nation and a more peaceful world. And never has it mattered more than we go forward together. Look at this chamber. The leadership of America is here today. The Supreme Court, the Cabinet, the Senate, the House of Representatives. Together,